This is an incredibly important topic to me because it all goes back to education, which I equate to investing back into the community. You educate the children, they grow up, they, fingers crossed, become responsible adults who can vote and make laws and policies. And so you're essentially building up the community from within. And we can take a look at socioeconomic problems through multiple lenses. So I did some homework to prepare for this answer, and I am more than happy to share the resources with you, Jasmine, so that if you want to put this side by side with your podcast, people can go and take a look at these articles and these resources. According to a 2022 article by unwomen.org, one additional school year can increase a girl's earnings by 10 to 20% as she reaches adulthood. A 2018 study backed by World Bank with support from the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, the Global Partnership for Education, and the Malala Fund found that lower earnings for women in adulthood due to low educational attainment lead to losses in human capital wealth. And it's estimated that if all girls get 12 years of schooling, human capital wealth could increase by 15 to 30 trillion dollars. And that higher estimate is based on the current benefits of attaining a higher education. All right. Okay, Justine, these all sound great. What's the problem? Well, are girls even getting access to this higher education in the first place? So you're going to need to probably stick with me on this one. According to the 2022 report, Progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, the Gender Snapshot, children with disabilities have less access to early childhood education, according to data from 42 countries. And the disparity is greater for girls, where only 18% of girls with one or more functioning difficulties attended an early childhood education program. And the pandemic-related disruptions to education have further deepened these inequalities in learning for girls and young women. But there was already a bias at providing services for girls even before the pandemic. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, during the 2018 to 2019 school year, 18% of male students ages 6 to 21 received special services under IDEA, which is Individuals with Disabilities Act, compared to only 10% of female students benefiting from these services. However, studies have found that based on scientific criteria, there is no gender gap when it comes to learning problems. It's just that teachers recommend twice as many boys as girls for learning disability support, when in fact, there's an equal amount of students with learning problems. So, problem one, girls with learning disabilities are underserved compared to their male counterparts, and the inequity is getting larger post-COVID. Number two, that same gender snapshot report also stated that school and daycare closures due to COVID in 2020 required 672 billion hours of additional unpaid childcare globally. And assuming the gender divide in care work remained the same as before the pandemic, women would have shouldered 512 billion of those hours. And evidence suggests, however, that women took on an even larger share of unpaid care work. So problem two, girls are further burdened with the childcare and the household duties, essentially taking up their limited time and energy. And double this if a girl has a learning disability and she falls back on her studies as she wasn't able to get her services in the first place. Number three, when we look at the falling back on studies, according to the Pew Research Center in 2020, the homework gap, which refers to the school-age children who are lacking the digital connections they need to complete schoolwork at home. The homework gap is more pronounced for Black, Hispanic, and lower-income households. School-age children in lower-income households are especially likely to lack broadband access. And I witnessed this myself as a teacher. Roughly 1/3, 35% of households with children ages 6 to 17 and an annual income below $30,000 a year do not have high-speed internet connection at home, compared with just 6% of such households that are earning 75,000 or more a year. And these broadband gaps are particularly pronounced in Black and Hispanic households with school-aged children, especially those with low incomes. So problem 3, communities that are already facing historically underserved resources have a widening gap in catching up with their white counterparts. COVID has also brought increased adolescent pregnancies, which further threaten girls' education by forcing many of them to drop out of school early, thereby impacting their future education and job opportunities. So I feel like this one's a pretty self-explanatory as to why it is problem number 4. But speaking of job opportunities, even before COVID, women were earning less than their male counterparts. The Pew Research Center in 2018 found that men in STEM's annual salaries were nearly $15,000 higher per year than women. And Latina and Black women in STEM earned around $33,000 less, so at an average of around $52,000 a year. So problem 5, when we add the racial inequity layer to gender, we get another story of further disservices to women of color. All of this to say, we are systemically setting up our young women of color for failure. They have the potential to earn 20% more earnings with more years of completed school. And yet there are these hurdles and barriers blocking them to achieve their full potential. I haven't even touched on what maternal health services are like within the overall healthcare system, let alone in these neighborhoods. I haven't discussed how low-income areas are seen as food deserts, limited access to healthy food options. Haven't even scratched the surface of mental health support services and what that looks like for our young women who are not provided early childhood education for themselves, let alone their own children, and having to choose between taking care of themselves or taking care of others. We cannot plan to improve historically underserved communities when we continually underserve half the population of said communities. This is why it is so important to me.